So, welcome to our session officially on how to analyze nonprofit data with Excel's pivot tables, meaning you just get to drag and drop variables. You don't have to type in any formulas. If you haven't downloaded the spreadsheet yet, it's here. It's this link in highlighter yellow. If it would let me put a link in the chat to download this, or excuse me, put the actual Excel file in the chat, I would, but I was hoping that this link would be easy enough for you, and I think you all have it already, which is perfect. Okay, here is the link one final time for anybody who might have just joined. So what we're going to be doing today is walking through pivot tables from start to finish, and my goal is to move you up a half a level within just 45 minutes. So that's very aspirational, but why not, right? So let me know in the chat, where are you currently? Which of these statements resonate with you? And a disclaimer too, it's nearly impossible to assess our own skills when it comes to data analysis and data visualization. Sometimes beginners think they're more advanced than they are. Sometimes advanced people, like, I'm kind of in that kind of. I feel like a total beginner. I first learned pivot tables probably 10, 15 years ago when I started doing research and evaluation work. And, they take like 5 minutes to learn, right? So we're going to get you from at least beginner to intermediate. And then there's also some nuances, though, and some details, and it can be a little trickier to figure out how to apply this to your own workplace and your own data set. And there's data cleaning and other formulas that, like, yes, in real life you do have to often do, but we're gonna get you moved up. All right, Natasha says hi, intermediate, maybe. Perfect. Let's get you like a solid, solid high intermediate. Get the maybe and the question mark out of there, or at least a little bit more advanced. Marisol's beginner, perfect, you're in the right place. Karen says, I know a fair amount about data analysis. I'm embarrassed not to be able to do pivot tables. Karen, I think they're going to be easier than you realize. I think you're going to be just like, whoa, why didn't I know these before? These are so easy. That's my goal for you, right? Okay, Audrey says intermediate. Inez loves pivot tables. Okay, so if you're already like loving and using pivot tables a lot, or maybe even being able to teach others, what you're going to get from this session is likely just oh yeah, I am on the right track. I'm doing it right. I'm not missing anything. Okay, so for you all, I'm probably not going to teach you many skills. There's really not much to pivot tables. It's a perfect thing to teach in a 45-minute session. For you, it's likely just going to be a stamp of approval. It's going to be a virtual high five saying, yeah, you're doing it. That's it. You're not missing anything. For beginner people, we are going to get you up to like, you've heard of pivot tables, you've used them. Things in spreadsheets don't quite take forever. And then it sounds like probably a lot of people are more in this bucket. Perfect. All right, I'm going to check back in with you in about half an hour before we end, and we'll see if I did my job okay. So pivot tables go like this. I wrote out the instructions for you in like a medium amount of detail. I did not type out, click here, and then click this cell, and then click this cell, because we're going to practice this 1, 2, 3, or 4 times on these fictional data sets that I've got for us to practice on. So please don't feel, if you're new to this, please don't feel like, don't be jotting down and like scribbling notes on your notebook and stressing about every single little button. I want you just, watch my screen and then practice on your screen, and then watch my screen and then practice on your screen again. And I promise you, we're going to get you closer to pivot table fluency. Okay. I want you to practice by doing, not just writing down. Got it? All right. Well, let's launch in then. Step 1 with pivot tables. This one's optional. Or step 0, actually, right? It's an optional pre-step, is to convert your regular spreadsheet into an Excel table. Let me know in the chat when I say Excel table. It's an uppercase T table. How familiar are you with that concept? Are you like, is that just a regular table? Question mark. It's not. It's a specific feature. Maybe you use Excel tables all day, every day. You love them. They've worked well for you. What's your current familiarity with this term, Excel tables? Kristen uses them. Okay, great. These are optional. I didn't use them back in the day. So like way back in the day, when I 20 years ago at this point in college, I learned SAS coding in all of my research methods and statistics classes. And then I learned SPSS. That's what people were using at the time. I'm a little bit too old to have learned R or computer coding. I feel like people kind of a couple years after me took those types of computer science classes. Unfortunately, I kind of like missed that and have had to learn those skills on the job more. So way back in the day, I did SAS and SPSS. And then in grad school, I used SAS and SPSS too, and I did my master's in research and evaluation. And then on the job, even when I worked in consulting firms with huge budgets, and definitely when I worked inside nonprofits with smaller budgets, we didn't have SAS or SPSS or any of those things, and I had to use Excel, and I had to get super savvy at Excel. But way back in the day, I don't even know if maybe Excel tables didn't exist, or I didn't know about them, but I've come to love them. Okay, this is what it looks like. So we're gonna start with this sheet right here. And just watch for a moment, and then I'll give you a chance to practice, okay? I know not everybody has two screens. It can be tricky to have too many windows open at once. So you're just watching now. In a moment, you're going to go to this survey data set. Don't read into any patterns you see. This is totally made up. I pretended like that we had agree, disagree questions. I'm pretending we had people in different cohorts. I'm pretending we had maybe some like a high, medium, low, I don't know. I'm pretending maybe donated to a number. This is like totally made up, so don't read into this. In a moment, you're going to go to the survey sheet. You're going to click on the upper left corner, which in this case is cell A1, the upper left corner of your table. It's not always cell A1, typically cell A1. You're going to go to the Insert tab, and you're going to insert a table, not a pivot table. We're going to do that in a moment. That'll be our next step. You're going to insert a table, and you're going to see the flashing, blinking Excel lasso encircling your data set. That's just assuring you that it's highlighting, selecting everything correctly. It is. You don't have to do anything here. Don't worry about any of this jargon. You're just going to say, okay. And then you've probably seen this before. It's the automatic color coding. The banded rows come along with the table. The filters to help sort and filter your data, they come along with the table. But here is the beauty of tables is it future-proofs your data set. If you copied and pasted new data in, or you hand-entered new data in, oops, not down here, in this cell, Excel recognizes this as part of your table. Therefore, it would feed into your pivot table that lets you do all the tallying and summarizing and calculations. So you can add to the bottom of your table, you can append, that's the Excel lingo, you can append your table. You can also add to the right new columns over here. You could say like, we're going to do some slight data recoding, like amount donated, above or below $50. We could categorize these. And look, Excel says, it looks like that's probably part of your data set. I'm going to include it for you, which is exactly what we want to happen so that it feeds into our pivot table later. All right, I'm going to click undo a couple times on mine to undo the extra stuff that I just added. It is your turn. If you haven't already, I want you to go to the survey sheet, go to the upper left corner, cell A1 in this case, go to Insert, add a table. When you see the pop-up, click OK. Let me know in the chat when you're finished and when you're ready for the next step. Marisol's done, Kristen's done, Audrey's ready. Perfect. If you're stuck at any point, we're here live, so ask me questions right away. I'm happy to repeat anything that you need. Let's go to the official step one. We're going to make sure that pivot table prerequisites have been met. There's two main ones here. To avoid getting error messages, we want to be proactive, make sure we didn't mess anything up so we don't get confusing pop-ups later. The first prerequisite is all columns must be labeled. Now, the beauty of doing this Excel table first is our prerequisites are also going to be met. So here's what I mean by every column must be labeled. If you insert a new column someplace, if this is not an Excel table, it's going to look like a totally blank column, and the pivot table is going to get confused. Since this is an Excel table, it automatically gets a label. Like this is not blank. I don't know why it says Q12. Maybe that's I don't know why. Does it think it's counting? I don't know. It came up with that name. You can like type over the top and stuff, but we don't want any empty column labels. So check. We've got that one. The second prerequisite to avoid error messages is we need to have contiguous cells. Contiguous. Years ago, when I had GRE flashcards and I was learning new vocab to go like take the GRE before grad school, I literally had a flashcard for contiguous. So when I learned this as applied to Excel later, I got so excited. I was like, finally using this word in real life. Contiguous means touching or sharing a border. Like the 48 contiguous U.S. states are all sharing a border, not Alaska, not Hawaii, touching or sharing a border. In spreadsheet lingo, what it means is no totally empty rows or columns. If you have an Excel table, which we do, and if you insert a new column, the contents are empty, but it's not a totally empty column because there's a header. So check. That's why the Excel tables help here. They're like just helping you avoid error messages. If in the Excel table, if you insert a totally empty row, it's actually part of the Excel table, so you get to avoid error messages. So by doing Excel tables, like you're also making sure prerequisites are met. If we didn't have an Excel table, look at this fictional demographics set. If we didn't go to insert, add an Excel table, and if we inserted a blank column or a blank row, what Excel would do in a moment for the pivot table is it would start up here, and it's looking for your data set. So it goes across until it runs into a totally empty column and it says E is totally bare. It's not contiguous. Your data set must live in cell A through D, and it's going to ignore all this other juicy stuff you've got in there. Same thing with the empty row. That's a big problem. Excel goes over and it goes down and it says row 10 is totally bare. It's not contiguous. It must not be part of your data set. So just be really careful. Just keep in mind Excel is looking for touching contiguous cells. A lot of times people insert blank columns and they think they're going to do something with it later, and they shrink their column down to like nothing. And you know how in real life you don't have tiny data sets like this. You have data sets that go a mile. They're a mile wide and they're like forever infinity long. So sometimes in practice, even I mess this up. We did step 0, an Excel table. We did step 1, check. Let's insert a new pivot table. I'm going to demo, then you're going to practice. So here's what you're going to do in a moment. You're going to go to your survey tab or sheet. You're going to click again on the upper left corner, which is usually, but not always, cell A1. You're going to go to insert. Last time we did a table. This time we're doing a pivot table. You get a pop-up window that's just the same encircling lasso around your data set. It's just confirming, like, is it this? Is it this table 1 you just added? Yes, it is. It also asks where we want the pivot table to be placed. If I'm only making one pivot table, I do a new worksheet. Sometimes I'll stack or arrange a bunch of pivot tables on one sheet. Like if I'm making an interactive dashboard, sometimes I'll use existing worksheet. Most of the time it's new worksheet. So for you, you're just going to click OK. You don't have to change anything here. Just go to cell A1, go to insert, go to pivot table. When you see the pop-up, click OK, and you're going to get a brand new sheet. Sheet 1. You are going to, in a moment, rename your sheet to stay organized. You are not allowed to keep anything sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3. That is an absolute red flag showing that like something is crazy. It's a disorganized spreadsheet. That is a red flag to me when I'm looking at other people's, like I work with a lot of foundations, philanthropists, federal agencies these days, or big national nonprofits. And I always check to see if they name their sheets. So what you're going to do is right click on sheet 1. You're going to go to rename. And this pivot table is about the fictional survey data. Let's just call it survey pivot, right? We don't need any fancy name, just something like that. Okay. And then I'm going to give you a walkthrough of what these boxes do. Now, I'm on a small PC laptop today. You might be on a big screen. Yours may look a little bit different. You might be on a Mac. Yours might look a little bit different. You're going to have these same options. They might just be located in a different spot. So if you don't see something I'm talking about, let me know and we'll troubleshoot live together. Okay. But this box, the fields, which might be on the top of your screen if you're on a big screen. I'm on a little screen, so mine's on the left. These are the names of all the columns in the data set. Look at our fictional data set. We had respondent ID, Q1, Q2. Oops, Q22 in mine. Let me delete this. Q3, cohort, et cetera, et cetera. That's the name of all of this here. And then pivot tables are a drag and drop feature. We have 4 boxes we're going to drag them into in a moment. Okay, it's your turn. I would like you to insert your brand new pivot table. As a recap, you're going to your data set, your survey data set, click cell A1, go to insert, go to pivot table, and just click OK. And then rename your sheet. Please, 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 please. No sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3. Let me know in the chat when you're ready to move on to the next step. Marisol's ready, Natasha's ready, Audrey's ready. If anybody's stuck, let me know, but let's keep going with, we're already on step number 3 out of just 4. So we're going to drag and drop variables. I've got some more notes in here because each data set's a little bit different. That's why I purposely picked a bunch of different types of nonprofit and foundation data sets I often see. You might want to highlight this for yourself. This is a pretty important one. If your data set, some data sets are like this, some are not. If your data set has unique ID numbers, those get dragged into the values box and you change them to a count. That's a lot of jargon. Let me show you what it means. In our survey data, we do have a column with unique ID numbers. So in our pivot table, we are going to take the unique ID numbers, the little one that says respondent ID, you're going to drag it into the values box. By default, it shows us a sum. It shows us this number plus this number plus this number are adding up to like 20 million bajillion numbers. We don't want the sum. We want a count. We want each of our people, each of our survey respondents to be counted just once. Sum versus count took my brain a while to click. I kind of had to think about it, but once you get it, it's like, oh, duh, like a count. I want a tally. I want each person counted once. So in a moment, you're going to drag respondent ID into values. And then do you see where my mouse is down here in the bottom right of my screen? There's a little down arrow. It says sum of respondent ID, down arrow. You're going to go to value field settings. AKA settings. They just added extra jargon for us. And you're going to change this to a count. We want to count each person one time. Click OK, and that tells you the N for our data set. We have 55 respondents. It's your turn. Drag respondent ID into values. Change it from a sum to a count. Let me know in the chat when you're ready to move on. Kristen's ready, Inez is ready, Audrey's ready, Karen's ready. All right, let's keep going. Now we're going to drag one variable at a time into rows. It looks like this. You're going to go to your pivot table, you're going to drag Q1 into rows, and then you get a summary table. Okay, this should be pretty easy to read. 24 people said agree. 2 people said disagree. 13 people said neutral. Your data set may or may not have blanks in there. Actually, I was going to show you this in a moment. Let me refresh mine because remember how I added some like extra rows in there? It looks like we might have some blanks. That's fine too. Okay, go ahead and drag Q1 into rows. Let me know when you're done. Kristen's done. Audrey's done. Marisol's done. Okay, let's pivot our table. Drag Q1 from rows into columns. Instead of one row for agree, one row for disagree, etc. Now we have one column for each one. That's where the pivot table gets its name, right? You get to drag and drop back and forth, and you just pause as you go and you say, is that the view that makes sense for my data set? Does that one make more sense? And you're going to trust your gut instinct a little bit here. There's going to be different layouts or views of your table that you're going to gravitate towards. And I encourage you to trust your gut. For example, when I see this one and I'm like, I don't even know, it's all colored in. I have to scroll way to the side. That's hard to read. I don't like that one. I don't. I find it's easier to read in rows. All right, next up, we are going to do crosstabs. That means two variables at a time. That's a SPSS term from way back in the day. If anybody used SPSS a million years ago, you might recognize the term crosstabs. It means like this. Let's drag cohort into columns. So you still have respondent ID and values. That's where ID numbers go if you have any in your data set. That's still a count. We've got question one in rows, and we've got cohort in columns. Make yours match mine. Let me know in the chat when you're finished. Natasha's done, Inez is done. You know how to read this, right? Is it easy enough even on a fictional data set? Out of the fall cohort, 4 people answered agree. Out of the spring cohort, 20 people answered agree. That's 24 agrees total. That's it. It's our summary table thanks to dragging and dropping. This is typically the max that I do for pivot tables. One thing in values, ID numbers if applicable, and then 2 other variables. That's about it. Yes, in theory, you could add more variables. You could stack them all. You could go like layer on, oh, this gets so messy, like cohort, previous experience of the topic. So you've got by cohort, previous experience. Like who even knows how to read this? You can stack them all you want. You could put all these numbers in here and it just gets like impossible to read. It gets so tricky. So I don't recommend doing that. I recommend, what do we have here? Like something like this, you know, 1 variable in values and then 2 others. You can stack them both in rows. If you have cohort first, then you see cohort first, followed by question 1 answers. Cohort first, followed by question 1 answers. You can rearrange them. You could put 1 in rows and 1 in columns. That's the name pivot table, okay? I see Audrey's question. You lost the pop-up of pivot table fields. No worries at all. This is really easy to bring back. Microsoft tries to be clever. So I have a love-hate relationship with Excel. I use Excel for like the coolest things all day long, but what they do is if you click on some other cell, Microsoft's like, I'm going to hide your pivot table buttons and just tuck them away. And it's like, but I wanted those. So to bring them back, you can just click in the body of your pivot table again. And if that doesn't bring them back, it's a little bit different based on what version of Excel you're in. You just click on the pivot table and then you're going to see up at the top some tabs that are colored in a different color. On my version of Excel, they're green. I think on my old version of Excel, maybe they're shaded in pink or orange or something. You're going to see these 2 tabs up at the top. And if you go to pivot table analyze, you're going to show the field list again. Oh, you figured it out anyway. Okay, perfect. Okay. A couple more things. These are optional. Optional is you can reorder variables within the pivot table. You're going to have to click in just the right spot. I'm going to try to move my mouse super slow. So even with the slight delay we have, you can see my mouse. It goes like this, okay? Rather than having these by default, they're going to go alphabetical, which doesn't make any sense for an agree-disagree scale. I want to put strongly agree first. So what you do is you click on the strongly agree cell. And then you have to click right on the border, and your cursor, I don't know if you can see it on my screen, your cursor is going to turn into that kind of plus sign with arrows going in opposite directions. You're going to click on that, like click down your mouse and carefully drag it. Do you see mine being dragged? I'm trying to move it pretty slowly. So you can see that bracket type appearance, and you manually reorder it for where you want. Strongly agree. Agree. Let's put neutral next. Click on neutral. Hover your mouse over the exact border around the cell. You get that plus sign with the 4 arrows going in opposite directions. Click and hold it and drag it into the spot you want. Try reordering your variables. Click in just the right spot. Let me know when you're finished. Marisol's got it. We've got a fast group today. I love it. Sometimes I teach full day classes or 2-day classes with big groups. Last week, I do a lot of work with government agencies. Like I mentioned, I was in Tanzania and Dubai doing CDC trainings, and we had 50 people or so. So this is a treat for me to have a nice, small, engaged group. Okay, so that one's optional. Great. Sounds like everybody's got this one. Let me show you another optional thing. You can show percentages, either in addition to your counts or instead of counts. It goes like this, okay? You're going to, let's see, click in. I wonder if I want to have these variables here. Usually I do it a little bit different from this. Let's see. I'm going to click in my count. This should be fine. Every pivot table is a little different, okay? You're going to click on the one that says count of respondent ID, similar to what we did before, right? You're going to go to the down arrow, just like we did before. You're going to go to value field settings, same as before. We still want to summarize a count. We want each person to be counted once. We don't want a sum by all those long 6 or 7 or 8 digit ID numbers. But then, so we're still doing summarize values by count. That has not changed. Do you see the second tab? Show values as a percent. And you get to think about what's the denominator. Do you want a column total to be the denominator, a row total? Most of the time I'm doing a grand total, okay? And then it shows you percents. It's your turn to try this. You're going to go to count of respondent ID, click the down arrow, value field settings, go to the second tab, show values as percent of grand total. Let me know in the chat when you're finished. Kristen's got it. Marisol says, amazing. Perfect. I don't love the default setting that it shows us all these decimal places. I think it's even harder to find patterns that way. You've probably encountered this button before. If not, here's a bonus technique for you. I'm going to highlight all of these way too detailed percentages, and I'm going to use the decrease decimal button. Do you see where my mouse is? I'm on the home tab. I'm in the middle section, the number section. And if you hover your mouse over those little options, there's a decrease decimal button. You just tap it a couple of times and it does rounding for you. Karen says, this is going to save me time. Yeah, because what you have to do behind the scenes, Excel is doing something called a count ifs formula for you, which means it's doing this behind the scenes. This is the old way of doing things, right? You'd have to go down to the bottom. And let's say you want to summarize by cohort. You've got fall and you've got spring, and you'd want to total them up. And you'd have to do counts, and then you'd have to do percentages. I'm doing like rapid fire formulas here because I don't want you to follow along with this. I want you to appreciate that formulas have more chances for typos, and you really have to know what you're doing, and the pivot tables are bypassing all of this. Do you remember back in math class, maybe in high school, did you ever have those TI-83 calculators, the big heavy ones? And you'd be like, hey, teacher, if my calculator can do it, why do I have to show my work on the test? And they're like, because you'll need it someday. And it's like, but will I? Will I? So this is pivot tables for the calculator version. Behind the scenes here, Excel is doing, it's doing equals, count ifs. And you're looking through this criteria range. Oops, you'd have to even do more than this. You'd have to say out of the fall cohort, you have to say how many strongly agrees are there. It's even more. You have to set up a little summary table, neutral, disagree, strong. Oh, I like Excel. I love data, but this is a lot. Okay, you have to set up your table like this, and you'd have to say equals count ifs. You have to go to this whole range, all this whole thing, and only tally up the strongly agrees. And out of the cohort data, only tally up the ones that say fall. And then you have to learn about dollar signs, because you're going to have to do all these like dollar sign things in there to make sure everything is pulling from the right reference cell. And then you get your 3 strongly agrees for fall. And then you'd have to also do spring. And then you'd have to sum all these up. And then you'd have to turn those into percentages. And it's like, I don't mind doing that because I don't mind spreadsheets at all. I love spreadsheets. I love doing research and evaluation and data viz work. But for the vast majority of people, they're like, that looks like terrible to me. And dragging and dropping variables without any typos is, yeah. Marisol's been living in count ifs. Most of us have, right? Pivot tables save a bunch of time. Okay, we're almost out of time. Let me show you 2 more things. In a moment, you're going to highlight just the interior cells. If your pivot table looks like mine probably does, you're just highlighting the fall and spring columns, not the total at the right, not the total and the bottom, just the inside interior cells. Then you're going to go to the Home tab. You're going to go to Ann Emery's favorite button, Conditional Formatting, and you're going to add a color scale. You're not going to add the red-green ones. These are not colorblind friendly. 1 in 12 men and 1 in 200 women does not see red and green as different colors. So this is automatically inaccessible to many people you work with. Instead, you're going to pick this one on the bottom left, the green-white color scale. On most every project, this is the one you want. It just means the bigger numbers are going to grab your attention. Okay, give that a try. To recap, you're going to highlight the interior cells, Home, conditional formatting, color scales. Ignore the very outdated, very inaccessible color scales. Go to green-white so that you can find the patterns. The patterns just pop off the page, pop off the table for you. And then you're like, oh, look at that one, right? Let me know when you're finished, and I'll show you the final thing for the day. Karen, I love your comment. Excel should throw an alert on your screen the minute you start typing that count if formula. There is a better way. I do a lot of automated dashboards in my real consulting work, and I absolutely do have very long formulas in those because I'm customizing everything just perfectly. But I would say like most of my work, most of the time, is perfectly fine with pivot tables. Great. You just got so much time back in your life. Great use of 45 minutes, right? Okay. One more thing before we close out is this final one about refresh your pivot table. So remember, we've got the survey data set. It's linked to the survey pivot table, kind of. It's linked temporarily. Anytime you update your data set, the link's broken. It's not going to automatically update in your table. For example, if I, should I temporarily like totally screw up my data set? Let me just make a change. Let's pretend that like, I don't know, you realize something was wrong with the data and all these people are actually supposed to be strongly disagree. So you should see a huge number of strongly disagrees. Let me just fill a bunch of these in. Okay. Just pretend. Don't do this on your data set. Don't mess up your data set. But pretend you changed Q1. You changed the Q1 contents. You found typos. You added new data. You added more columns. You added more variables. The pivot table does not automatically update. I wish that wasn't the case. but it doesn't. So what you have to do is just get in the habit of every time you update your data set, you need